The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board meeting for June. And hopefully everyone will get something out of this one. We're very excited about having the presentation from David Borak from headquarters on the FACA. And I'll let him explain all of that, but it's basically the reason why we're here. So we're excited about that. I want to remind everyone to put your phones on mute. And if you are asking a question or speaking from your spot on the floor, please use the microphones. And I think we're good to go. All right, I want to remind everyone that in July, we do have new member training. Everyone is welcome to come to that if they like. We'll usually have an orientation here, and then there will be a follow-up field trip to visit some of the sites. I think we have some folks out in our, hey Leon, in our public gallery that will possibly be new members next year, so take heed of that. You will be getting emails about that from Pete or Spencer. We have an upcoming annual planning meeting in August. I'll talk about that a little bit further down when we talk about the committee reports. And to remind everyone that we will not have a formal meeting like this in August. The annual planning meeting does take the place of that meeting, and that is going to be as I said, August 19th, that's a Saturday, and it will be in Tremont Lodge in Townsend, Tennessee. And I believe that, Dave, you must be here for Jay today.
I am.
Okay. So would you like to take the next part of the agenda?
Sure.
Thank you.
I guess I've got a couple things to do. First, I'd like to welcome, I'm not going out of order here, am I? Welcome our new student representative, Cameron Niemeyer. Cameron, you want to raise your hand up? It's pretty obvious who the student rep is, but that's him. Cameron is a senior at Hardin Valley Academy. He's interested in biology, especially marine biology. He's in the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Academy, currently with a 4.41 grade average. 2-year varsity letterman at the Hardin Valley Academy soccer team and a member of the National Honor Society. Cameron plans to attend college and perhaps continue playing soccer after high school. He says learning about local environmental problems is very important, especially in Oak Ridge. So could we all welcome Cameron to the board? And now can I make the J statement, or do we do this? No, you do this part. Okay. So we're also saying goodbye to a few members who've been with us for a long time. There are, let's see, 3 of them are present, Mike Ford, David Hemmelwright, and Greg Paulus. These guys have all been a huge help to the board and really want to express a heartfelt thanks for the time that you guys have spent helping us out with this. In your combined 24 years of service, you've been instrumental in every area of the board's recommendations and interacting with the community and helping us out at national meetings and conferences, of course, spending endless hours attending and working with this board in meetings. There's no way to really adequately acknowledge how much we appreciate what you've done and how much you have done. All we can do is say thank you. It's obviously the pay's not that great. So we really, really are very, very thankful. Jay asked me to specifically say they wanted you to know that your contributions are greatly appreciated. Especially like to thank Dave, Howard, and Greg, who've completed the 6-year term limit, made it all the way to the end. Good for you. And it's with great gratitude that these members are presented with a small token, the plaques that we have up here. So we've already provided you with those and taken pictures, so I think we're good there. But thanks so much, guys. And please come back and listen and contribute as much as you care to in the future. Greatly appreciated.
EMS.
And now it's time for my comments. I don't have a lot of comments other than to apologize for Jay not being able to be here. He has a conflict, otherwise he would be here. There's one thing I wanted to mention. It sounds more dramatic than it is, so let me just explain it. We have just entered into something called a formal dispute with EPA and TDEC on the landfill project. It started a couple weeks ago, and the word dispute is probably a lot more dramatic than the actual situation. That's the term that exists in our federal facility agreement, which is a framework that we've all signed on to that kind of governs how we work together to get the Oak Ridge Reservation cleaned up. And in order to get the Oak Ridge Reservation cleaned up, we first have to collaborate on documents, we have to come to records of decision, and then we implement projects. In the case of the landfill expansion project, which you've heard us refer to as EMDF, Environmental Management Disposal Facility, the development of the feasibility study has sort of stalled out over some issues. And the frontline staff have worked very, very hard to bring those issues to closure, but have not been able to get it done. So we're entering into this protocol that basically says that the issue is elevated up to managers. So over the next several weeks, increasingly higher levels of management will be engaging on a couple of technical issues to work them out. We still hope to get to a proposed plan for formal public comment. Of course, we've had lots of interaction with the public informally on our ideas for a new landfill. And still hope to get to a formal public comment period sometime in the next few months. So that's the deal with that. And that's all I was going to mention this week, unless anybody has any questions for me about that or anything else. Yes, Dennis.
Has there been a precedent for working things through this way before?
Yes, yeah, we've had formal disputes before. I can think of, in my career with DOE, we've probably, with the cleanup program, we've had 3 or 4 or 5. We sometimes don't agree on how to spend our money, how to prioritize projects, what value we should clean up to or treat water to and things of that sort. And in every case I'm aware of, we were able to reach a mutually acceptable agreement reasonably promptly. Yeah.
Excuse me, Dave, is this about location? Is that the hang-up?
There are a few things. DOE actually initiated the dispute, and I can provide copies of it. It's only a page and a half long. It's pretty straightforward. DOE's position is that it's time to move forward with a proposed plan and to get public comment on the options that we're have under consideration, and ideally for DOE, EPA, and TDEC to identify a preferred option. I don't actually think there's much of a debate over where the best place would be to build it. It appears to be Bear Creek Valley, and there are a few options within Bear Creek Valley, and amongst those few options, I think we actually are pretty much in agreement on which one we'd like to propose to the public. It's a site that's west of the current facility by a mile or so, and that has as a relatively attractive feature the absence of streams and springs and things of that sort. We think we could sneak one in between the ephemeral streams. It's really more about how much detail should be in the risk assessments that are done pre-proposed plan versus how much detail on risk assessment and what wastes you accept should be established later in the decision process. DOE would like to go out with a fairly conceptual proposal, a large facility to receive soil and building debris and the more benign materials. And EPA and in particular TDEC is pushing for a little more definition, precision on the nature of the waste that would be received. So it's fine tuning that. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We have on the phone with us a couple of people, just to let everyone know. We have Connie Jones from EPA, and also Catherine Bales, one of our members, is on the phone. So just want to acknowledge them. And Connie, do you have anything you'd like to say at this point?
No, I don't. I think Dave captured the feedback, and I'm not on speakerphone. I think Dave captured the EMDS issue very well.
Okay.
But I don't have any other things to announce.
Okay. Thank you, Connie. And thank you for being on. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now our TDEC representative, Krzysztof Sartrowski. Krzysztof, do you have something?
I would like also to mention that Dave's characterization of the dispute was very factual.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to ask Dennis to take care of the public comment period.
The public comment period is now open. There were no names listed that wanted to speak during the public comment period.
But we do have someone up there.
Oh, sorry.
Luther Gibson, Board Chair 2001, 2002, member 99 to 2005. I think I put in the middle there between the yes and no about, and I'm generally, it's generally hard to react to the things that are going to be said, you know, with the public comment period at the first of the meeting. However, I think tonight's presentation may be more interesting than it seems. As a former board member and an officer, I was very, very taken by the access that you get as a member of the board and an officer to DOE officials, regulators, and contractor officials. And I know there's a slide on conflict of interest and things in there. You will make contacts with people that are you know, in rather high positions that you might not otherwise be able to make, and you might want to reflect on you know, use of those contacts later on and how they were developed. Another thing, I'm not sure where you are on the recommendation for the material disposition. I had another thought on that. One, there are some materials that have consequence in the emergency management program that could be at a couple of facilities that could be easily, you know, dispositioned in some way, you know, so that the emergency planning would not have to consider classifiable operational emergencies, you know, from those materials. And I'd be willing to talk to the issue manager on those issues a little more detail if you're interested. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, it's time for our presentation. Dennis.
David Borak is here to speak with us this evening. He serves as both the designated federal officer for the Environmental Management SSAB and the acting director of the Office of Intergovernmental Stakeholder Programs within the Office of Environmental Management. Dave has more than 20 years experience with intergovernmental and community involvement, including the last 8 years with EM. Prior to joining EM, he worked with the National Governors Association and the International City County Management Association, focusing on environmental cleanup issues for various forms of government. Dave has an MPA from Indiana University and a BS in political science from Binghamton University. He lives in Fairfax, Virginia with his wife and 3 kids. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Dennis. So yes, thanks you all for having me out here. Sometimes it's kind of nice to escape the craziness in Washington, D.C., so it's, I'm really happy to be here today. So as Dennis mentioned, I'm the designated federal officer for all of the site-specific advisory boards. They're listed about, we have 8 of them right now across the country. We've had as many as 12 at one time, but they have, as those sites closed down, we have moved on and closed our site-specific advisory board. They have various names. They call themselves, some of them are called citizen advisory boards, some of them are SSABs, but they're all generally under one umbrella of the EMSSAB, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in my presentation. So one of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, some of the rules and regulations guiding the program, the role of the DFO and the DDFO and what exactly that means, some of your roles and responsibilities, some legal considerations. I'll talk a little bit about sort of the work of our boards, targeting work plans and subcommittees, and then I'll happy to answer any question you might have. So what is the EMSSAB? So we were chartered in 1994, and this was based on a recommendation from something called the Federal Facilities Environmental Restoration Dialogue Committee. I think that was it. And they recommended that the Office of Environmental Management should have get advice from citizens who live around their sites, and they should specifically have those advisory boards chartered under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and I'll get a little bit more into that as we go on. There is one charter for all of our advisory boards, so each board is unique and has their own rules and regulations, and I'll talk about that as well, but there is only one charter. So Department of Energy considers all of our boards to be one large advisory board. We are unique among federal cleanup agencies. So EPA and Department of Defense all do environmental cleanups, and they do involve their citizens in their cleanup. But DOE is unique in that we have a formal vehicle in our advisory boards in obtaining advice and recommendations from our citizens. And we can do that more than EPA and DOD because we have a limited number of sites. So because of that, it lent itself to this kind of structure that works out. And I should say, as I go on, if you have questions during my presentation, please raise your hand, and I'm happy to be interrupted. The overall purpose of our advisory boards is to provide advice concerning the EM cleanup. Our members are specifically representative members and not experts. And most advisory boards around the government are not structured this way. They are considered experts. And because they're considered experts, those members are considered special government employees. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on too. But you are all, some of you are actually experts in the various fields that you're working on, but it's not a requirement to be an expert to be on our advisory board. The only requirement is that you have to be in a resident in the area. And that's unique among advisory boards. I just found out recently, Department of Interior has a similar advisory board structure as EM does. But they were the only other agency I could find that has that. Okay, so I keep talking about the Federal Advisory Committee Act. The Federal Advisory Committee Act was signed into law by President Nixon in 1972. This was not, however, the beginning of advisory committees. Can anyone guess who was the first president to form an advisory committee? Abraham Lincoln's good guess. It was actually George Washington. And it was during something called the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. And if any of my staff from DC were here, this is where they would groan, because they groan every time I say the words Whiskey Rebellion, because they're like, do you have to bring up Whiskey Rebellion? I'm like, yes, it's exciting. So I'm kind of a history buff. So Whiskey Rebellion, for those of you who don't know, if you can imagine, the newly formed United States had broken away from England, and they started taxing whiskey. And some folks didn't think that was a nice thing to do. And in fact, it was not in Tennessee that they were angry, but it was in western Pennsylvania at that time where they were really producing much of the whiskey. They started to get angry. President Washington formed a committee of experts, military experts and taxation experts, to get together and provide him with advice on what he should do. So advisory boards have been around for a very long time. But FACA came in 1972, and what that did was it formalized everything. At that point, before FACA, advisory boards were kind of all over the place. Some boards were meeting in secret without the public being aware of what they were meeting about. Some boards were being funded by the federal government. There was even a report that one of the boards had gotten so much funding that they started investing their funding, and then they were paying for themselves based on the interest on the income that they had gotten. And so there was a lot of hanky-panky going on, if you will, on our advisory boards. FACA, what it did was it formalized all of that, and it formed something called the Committee Management Secretariat, which is run through the General Services Administration, GSA. And the Committee Management Secretariat, what they do is they are responsible for organizing all of the advisory boards throughout the federal government. And they do so through something called the FACA database, or if you go to facadatabase.gov, they've got a listing of every board, every recommendation that they've ever done, who all the members are on all those boards, and it's quite extensive. The idea behind FACA was to lend credibility and sort of bring more public trust in what these advisory boards were doing to the federal government. So who were the key players when the FACA was formed? Well, I mentioned GSA has sort of the overall management structure. Within DOE, every agency has a committee management officer, one CMO in every agency. Our CMO right now is a woman named LaTanya Butler. Different agencies do it in different ways. In some agencies I've worked with, the CMO has a really active role in managing what goes on with the advisory boards. DOE has kind of a decentralized approach and more of the responsibilities with the DFOs more than the CMOs. So I mentioned, so the designated federal officer, every advisory board has to have a designated federal officer, and that person is me, and they are responsible for all the reporting requirements that go on with all of our advisory boards. At our field sites, what DOE has done is we have designated deputy designated federal officers, DDFOs. And what this means is these are not people who report to me in any way. This is just a way for me not to have to travel around the country to every board meeting, and it allows me to sort of, whatever authority FACA gives me is now in the place of the DDFO. So when I say DFO, it's DFO or DDFO. It kind of means it's the same thing. We have alternate DDFOs out here. That also means the same thing. What it does is FACA requires that the DFO be present when a meeting is being held. Meetings cannot be held without the DFO being there. So as long as we have a DFO, an alternate DDFO, or a DDFO at the meeting, you're not in violation of FACA. Then we also have federal coordinators. This is a term of art that we use within our program, and it really is just someone else on staff, on the DOE staff to help out. We have contractor staff also here helping out with our boards. Then we have you all, we have the board members. Each board has a chair and vice chair. FACA requires that there be a chair, and the vice chair is optional, but it allows for that as well. The chair is responsible for running the meeting, ensuring that meeting minutes are being done. They act as a point of contact for the CAB members. They call for votes, and they also serve as part of a national meeting that we have as part of the EMSSAB. So I know Belinda and Dennis really well because they come to a chairs meeting every year, and you probably heard about that. And the chairs meeting is also a unique thing that we do. It allows for the chair and vice chair of every board that we have, so 16 people, to come together twice a year and discuss issues both at their site and at the national level. And so that works out really well. And then we have you all, the members, and we also have liaisons, and liaisons can be from states, they can be from tribal government officials. Some of our boards have tribal government liaisons, or some of them even have local government liaisons as well. So, the basic legal requirements under FACA. We have to have charter. We have to have a charter that has to be renewed every 2 years. The charter is a very simple document. It's about a page and a half long, and just outlines what are the topics that our board is working on, what is our membership term limit. So we have, as you know, 2-year terms for a maximum of 3. And that is one of the key parts of FACA, is that you have this charter. The other key part is that you have an open meeting. There's something called, in addition to FACA, we use something called the Sunshine Act, which means basically showing sunshine on things that the federal government is doing. So we're responsible to making sure that this meeting is an open meeting, that it's in a place that's accessible to the public. One of the reasons that we tried not to have our board meetings on site at any of our sites, because that's harder for the public to get there. I just one brief discussion on open meetings. So we do, some of our boards, and I think you do this as well, you're allowed to have a non-open meeting. I use the term non-open instead of closed meeting because it's a little bit different. So if you're doing administrative or preparatory work at your board, FACA allows for that meeting to be not a closed meeting, but not necessarily an open meeting. By not open meeting, it means we don't necessarily have to publish it in the Federal Register. We don't necessarily have to have a public comment time during those meetings. But those meetings are only to be for administrative work. There's supposed to be no recommendation talk at those meetings and nothing involving that the public would be interested in. FACA does allow for closed meetings, and those are done by usually military or intelligence-based advisory boards, and there you're talking about things that are of a secure nature, and they're allowed to close those meetings. But they're required to report which of those meetings are closed and for how long and for the reasons for that they had to close those meetings. So it's not something we at DOE EM have to deal with, but just wanted to sort of bring that up. We have to maintain a balanced membership at on our advisory boards. So what is balanced membership? It's a very vague concept. FACA requires a balance of interests, is all it says. You have to have a balance of interests. DOE has written some policies related to this, and what we try for in our board meetings are, yes, a balance of interest, but we also try to have a balance of gender, of race, of geographic region that you all are from. You're not required to have numerical parity at your meeting, and I always say that balance is sort of it's something that we aim for, and we can never really be a truly balanced board. But we do our best to try to have, if we have too many people who are from this area, we try to have people from another area there. No individual or group has a right to be on an advisory board. There have been a number of court cases. In fact, the first one was actually an EM board out in New Mexico about a group who felt that they were not represented on the board. FACA lets the agency have a lot of leeway in what they think should be on the advisory board. And there have been a number of cases that have been struck down where people have said, I deserve to be on the board. And that's not found to be the case. FACA also requires us to have a public comment during our board, and the public is allowed to file written statements as well at those meetings. And that's really it. People often quote the Federal Advisory Committee Act as saying, you're violating FACA when you're doing this, but it's a very simple document. It doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. And it reminds me of that my mother used to quote the Bible a lot. So whenever I would want to do something, she would quote something from the Bible as saying a reason that I can or can't do it. And only when I got older did I realize that it never says in the Bible that you can't go outside with wet hair. So same with FACA. It's something where people say, oh, you're violating FACA. But in the reality is we have our own guidelines and principles and that we try and follow. But FACA really is just a sort of a generic template of what your advisory boards should be like. And as such, there's sort of guiding documents for what we use when we do our advisory boards. At the top of the chart, we have FACA, of course. DOE has written something called the Committee Management Manual, which really just explains a little bit in more detail what's in the FACA. We have our charter I mentioned. We've issued some guidance documents that have best practices, like things like how to do a work plan, how to form subcommittees. And then you all have your own local board operating procedures, which is how you run your meetings. Some boards use Robert Rules of Order, others use other methods, and it's just it's really up to you what you have adopted. But as long as you are obeying all the ones above you, there should be no issues. So why do we involve the public in cleanup decision making? EM is made up of a lot of technical engineers, and sometimes I get yelled at by them because they don't want to involve the advisory board in this, and they think, why should we involve the advisory board? We know how to clean up our sites. What's the point of having citizens give us advice, especially citizens who don't have to be experts in this issue? So I always try to hit them with a few of the things listed on here. Your local values in what you have in living in this community is something that DOE cannot obtain through scientific means. What you think is important should be part of how we design our cleanup. I think our advisory boards build trust. There's an idea of having an open meeting where we're presenting all of our information, having the public comment on that meeting. That's a way of building trust. You provide us with independent input. We're very careful not to pay you all any money. And the reason is because we want your input to be independent. We don't want you to be beholden to DOE in any way, and to provide us with honest answers in what you think we should be doing. Help us with transparency. When you're dealing with cleaning up nuclear waste, transparency is really important. Anything nuclear can be kind of frightening to the general public, and I think having an advisory board there made up of members of the general public can help with transparency. And finally, our cleanup is long-term. So we always looked to how we can involve the next generation. And you all have a great student program here at Oak Ridge. Some of our other boards have that as well. And so our advisory board kind of helps with helping the next generation who are going to be around when we're still cleaning up these sites. Okay, so we're getting to some of the nitty-gritty into what are the DFO/DDFO requirements under FACA. The basic job of a DFO or DDFO is to maintain information on the nature, functions, and operations of their advisory board. They prepare all the Federal Register notices. They do membership packages. The membership packages are a big deal in Washington, D.C. because we love paperwork. And your packages are very interesting. So what we do is we gather your names and your information and a bio of each of you, and sort of a listing of what your interest areas are and some of your background, and we prepare a package for membership for Oak Ridge. That package gets reviewed by a lot of people. It gets reviewed by people within EM, of course. It gets reviewed by people in the Secretary of Energy's office, and it gets reviewed by people in the White House as well. So we take our advisory boards very seriously. So that's just one of the things that a DFO and DDFO has to do, is to make sure that package gets through the process smoothly. And that package, as Melissa can tell you, takes a long time on occasion. So part of my job in Washington, D.C. is to kind of make that package process move along its path. We try to get into ethical standards, make sure all of our boards are following ethical standards. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And just finally, we just try to make our board meetings accessible to the public as much as we can. All right, so I like to talk. And so I'm going to hit you all with a discussion question and see what you think. So let's say your DDFO and both your alternates can't make a meeting, but you want to get together just to go over the wording of a recommendation. And someone from DOE, maybe a federal coordinator is going to be by and be at your meeting. Are you allowed to meet just to discuss the wording of a recommendation? What does everyone think?
No. Yes.
All right, so it's about 50-50. The answer is no. And the reason is because you're discussing a recommendation, that has then the DDFO has to be there, and there has to be time for public comment, and it has to be open for the public to hear what you're discussing in terms of the recommendation. If you want to, yeah, please.
You're discussing what the recommendation will be. You haven't presented it to you or the public yet. It's just wording. It's wordsmithing. That you can do it right.
Well, so when I get into subcommittees, I'll talk a little bit about that. A subcommittee can meet and talk about that. But if the whole board is gathering, and it's a quorum of members.
If it's to approve a recommendation, I agree with you. If it's to discuss the wording of the recommendation, I don't.
All right.
This is why they're kicking me off.
And it's a fine line. And you know what? So let's talk about what happens if you're violating
Dave?
FACA. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
David.
David, can the DDFO for a specific site appoint or designate a temporary DDFO to fill in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And which is why some sites have permanent alternate DDFOs like Oak Ridge, because it's just important to have a DDFO at your meeting. And once they're there, you can talk about anything that you want to talk about. But they have to be present at your meeting. And that's really the key to it. But what happens if you do violate FACA? Is there a FACA jail that you all can be sent to? And the answer is no, there is no FACA jail. There are no criminal or civil penalties attached to FACA, and there's no danger of anyone having to pay any kind of fines. But the reason that we take it so seriously is what violating FACA can lead to is litigation. Litigation is time-consuming, it's costly for the department, and it also, in general, erodes this public trust that we're trying to build. So that's why we're so careful with having public comment time, having all these meetings, and following all these rules and regulations, even though there's no actual penalty for violating them, because it's important to the department that we do all this. Okay, so your responsibilities as members, we ask you to attend meetings. You are required to learn about the site and the EM program. You're not required to be an expert on the program, but we do ask that you try to learn about our mission. You provide us with recommendations. That's sort of the key function of your advisory board. We ask that you'll work collaboratively and respectfully, which is not a problem I have with the Oak Ridge board. I won't name names, but we've had some issues with other boards where heated discussions arise from advisory board meetings, which should not be, and is not surprising to me, because when you're dealing with cleaning up nuclear waste in your community with people who live in the community, this can be a heated discussion. I think that's one of the reasons that our advisory boards work so well, is that we have this structure in place. So it's not the same as DOE hosting a public meeting where we're releasing information about something that we're doing, because at those meetings, the public gets a chance to stand up and voice their concerns, and we answer them. But it's a little different for a FACA board, and I think that structure works really well. And we ask you to review any documents that we give you, and we ask you to notify the DDFO of any conflicts of interest. Now I'll talk about conflicts of interest, and this gentleman mentioned it as well. So you see this is my slide with the most words on it because the lawyers got a hold of this slide, and they had a lot to say. So it's conflicts of interest that are very interesting when it comes to the EMSSAB specifically. So I mentioned earlier that you are all representative members and you're not considered experts. If you were considered experts, you would be considered special government employees. What that would mean is you would have to give us your financial information related to what your investments might be, to see if you have any conflicts of interest with the work you're doing on the advisory board. And if you violated any of those conflicts of interest, there are penalties involved with that. However, for the EMSSAB, because you're representative members, you are not subject to those same federal ethical guidelines that I and Dave and Melissa are held to. But what our lawyers have asked me to say, and this is all true, as a matter of policy, we ask you to refrain from a number of instances where you could be put in an ethical dilemma. That is, for example, don't use your membership on the board for any professional or personal gain. We ask you to recuse yourself from any decisions where you have a direct financial interest, or where there might be where it might look improper if you were involved with. And we ask you to seek any guidance related to the DDF, to any questions you might have on that, to ask your DDFOs about that. As I mentioned, you cannot be held legally responsible, but the department can be held legally responsible if there's conflicts of interest. So I'll give an example of a conflict of interest that actually did come up at one of our board meetings. One of the people on the board had a cousin who was pretty high up as a contractor in one of the contractors at the site. They were bidding on a groundwater remediation contract, but the board at the time was debating a recommendation on groundwater remediation. So the member came and asked his DDFO if he should recuse himself from that discussion. And we consulted with the lawyers, and the answer was surprisingly, no, he didn't need to recuse himself. Because it was a cousin, it's not a direct financial interest in the recommendation that they might have. And that's what the lawyers specifically look for conflicts of interest, is you personally have a direct stake in the recommendations that you are providing. Questions on ethics? Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
what if you own stock in a company that's basically bidding on it? In that respect, you would have direct.
You would. And what I would do in that case is notify your DDFO that you do, and on that recommendation, just recuse yourself from involvement in that. And I should say, just as a point of fact, being a contractor and working on site is not a conflict of interest overall. We have obviously many of our members on the board work on the site or have worked on the site, so that's fairly common. Whoop. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about work plans. I know you all are meeting in August to go through your work plan for the year. And I bring this up as an example of one of sort of the key aspects of our advisory board. So there was a report in 2005 from GSA, and they asked the question of what makes an advisory board successful. And going through the data, what they found was precise, unambiguous knowledge of the objectives and purposes of your committee is what ended up being for the most successful advisory boards in the government. So I bring that up to say that your work plan for the year sets the tone of what you should be doing for the year, and helps you as members know exactly what the issues you should be working on for the upcoming year. Just as a caveat, work plans change throughout the year. Things pop up, things are new, and your work plan need to be adjusted, and that's perfectly reasonable. But we always try to teach our advisory boards and our advisory board members to try and stick with the work plan. If it's not in the work plan, it's generally not something either A, you should be working on, or that DOE has an interest in you working on. But like I said, if there's a new topic that comes up, the work plan can be addressed. And I'll just explain a little bit more about our work plan process. Our work plan process is a collaborative process. DOE comes up with topics that they would like to hear recommendations on, and you as members come up with topics that you would like to provide recommendations on. And the point of your meeting in August, and all of our boards have a meeting like that, is that you get together with those topics and go through them and say, this is good, and this becomes your work plan for the year. To be honest, the Oak Ridge SSAB is rarely out of scope on issues you should be working on. You are all, your work plan is generally excellent every year. We have a number of advisory boards, and I do this presentation for them, where they are always out of scope. It is frustrating, and it's because a lot of our sites, like Oak Ridge, have multiple parts of DOE within those sites: Office of Science, Office of Nuclear Energy, NNSA, and so if you're working on issues for the site, you want to find out what are these other agencies up to, what are these other offices up to. The EMSSAB, though, is supposed to specifically stick with EM and EM topics. So that's sort of the main things of people being out of scope on their work plans. I won't go too much into work plan, unless there are questions on work plan. I think we can largely skip this section. The last topic I just want to address is subcommittees. So subcommittees have become, not every advisory board has subcommittees in the federal government. But for the EMSCB, we have found that the real sort of work happens at the subcommittee level. Subcommittees, as you all know, have chairs sometimes. Subcommittees write the recommendations and sometimes bring them before the full board. But there are just some things to be concerned about for subcommittees that you should be aware of. So FACA is very loose when it comes to subcommittees. Subcommittees, it doesn't really consider board as a full board meeting, which is why you generally don't have to have, unless you're having a quorum at your subcommittee, you don't have to have them in the Federal Register. You don't necessarily have to have public comment, although you can if you want to. In general, though, what I have found works best for our sites is that many boards treat their subcommittees as if they're full board committees. So they have a public comment period. They notice them in the Federal Register, and they have the public come to them. But that is a local decision on your part. It's certainly not a requirement. Let's see. That's really all I have on subcommittees. Are there questions on subcommittees? No? All right, so I've got some more hypotheticals. We'll see, now that you've had the FACA training, what you all think. All right, so the board wants to have a dinner at Dave Adler's house. The whole board's going to come to this dinner. Is that a FACA board meeting? So the answer is no, because this is America and you're allowed to gather and do what you want. But if you start discussing recommendations at that dinner, then it becomes a FACA board meeting. And GSA has been, I think they've been very loose in defining what is a board meeting. They have had cases where there's an email chain, and you're sending an email chain with most of the board back and forth. And they've considered that is a FACA board meeting now. Now that you're discussing something related to the board, even though it's through email, it's now considered a FACA board. And so it needs to have public comment and notice in the Federal Register and all the different things that we have at our board meetings. So the general rule to follow is, one is if you have a quorum, that's when you need to be a little bit nervous. If you don't have a quorum, you don't have to worry too much. But two is it's the issues you are discussing when you are all together. So even if it's a casual environment, if you're discussing the board business, it needs to be follow all the rules of FACA. And this is a pretty basic idea. The idea is, yeah, if you wanted to, you could find ways around public comment and the public knowing what you're doing here at this meeting. But that's sort of not what we want to do.
What constitutes a quorum?
So that is according to your local bylaws, which I don't know. What do you know what that they are, Dave? I forgot to look it up before I came here.
Change to that. What's our majority?
Simple majority. Okay. So that varies depending on boards. Some boards it's 2/3. I recently told someone that they asked if how many people they needed to have at their meeting, and I said 6.5. According to your laws, it was 2/3 of 10, so it was 6.5. But yeah.
Yeah, Dave, just so everyone's information, with respect to the quorums, a couple of years ago, we actually changed our rules so that it would be a simple majority because we did have some problems getting enough people at our meetings. I think we were at the 2/3 or whatever it was at that time, and we were having trouble getting recommendations passed. So we went ahead and changed that a couple of years ago so that it would be easier for us to get recommendations passed. The other thing is we have, I think it's 22 members, and so our quorum is 11. Really should be 12. But it depends on how many people we actually have sitting, because
Right.
so it changes a little bit. So right now our quorum is 11.
And it's also up to you all if you, some boards have it so that if you have someone on the phone, they count as being present at the meeting. Some boards have that as not the case, so they want to encourage people to come to the meeting. So again, that's all, I mentioned that FACA is really not specific on a lot of their issues, and that's one of the things that your local laws decide.
And thank you, and that's actually a good point. It is really important when we are voting on recommendations that we have to do that in person. We cannot do that by email. It has to be at one of these meetings, has to be in the public forum, and then we do allow people to be on the phone and to vote. So I think last month when several of us were at the chairs meeting in Portsmouth, I was on the phone, Catherine was on the phone, and so we voted on our recommendations last month, and Catherine is on the phone right now, and so she'll be included in any votes that we have and recommendations this month. So hopefully that helps to clarify that for everyone. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Vanita Thomas. Where can we obtain an electronic copy of the FACA?
Oh, the actual law?
Yes.
I mean, I can send it to you, or you could just Google FACA. It'll pop up. It's all over the place.
Okay. Thank you.
And I should say the GSA does a FACA training for all DDFOs and the DFOs and federal coordinators, and it's a 2-day long, grueling event, and I've done it twice now. But so I've tried to compress what they teach into 1 hour. But the only thing about that training that I don't enjoy is that it's a lot of it is very specific to other kinds of FACA boards. Like I mentioned, the special government employees. That's what most FACA boards are. So that's what they focus their energy on. So I tried to cut out all of that stuff that you don't need to know. Okay. Belinda.
Yeah, something else on subcommittees. Obviously, when we have a subcommittee meeting, we have one of the DDFOs is here when we have the meetings in person. But we do have a process where we sometimes are sending out a draft recommendation to the subcommittee to review by email. So Melissa is always included in that email string. Pete's nodding his head, maybe, yeah. So that presumably, is okay. You said that,
Right, so
it's kind of gray area when you're dealing with subcommittees
Right.
and the subcommittee work.
Right.
But that's how we're able to
Right.
work our recommendations. But when it comes to the once the subcommittee has made that recommendation to the executive board, and once the executive board says, okay, we're going to review that at the full board level, then that discussion occurs in this forum.
Right.
And there's no offline discussion. It's all out here in the open.
Right, right. And subcommittees, just as long as they don't transmit a recommendation directly to the department, that it has to go through the full board. That's the only really requirement for subcommittees. What else?
Does anyone have any questions for David?
I'll be around if folks have any.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Okay, that was a very quick question and answer period. All right, at this point, that's the end of our sort of presentation portion of the meeting. Want to go ahead and call for any additions to the agenda or the approval of the agenda as we have. Any additions to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I would like to call for approval of the agenda.
Approve as written.
Okay, all right. I'm all right, approved, and Paula's seconded. And would like to go ahead and ask for approval from the members. Everyone in favour, right, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we move into motions, and I will ask Dave Hemmelwright to talk about the meeting minutes from the May meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Being absent from the May meeting, I did inquire of some folks that were in attendance, and they did assure me that the minutes as written were a representation of what really occurred. And I would recommend that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Okay, we have a
Motion
here and a second over there with Vanita. Thank you very much.
All in favor,
And all in favour, raise right hands. And we're unanimous. Oh, yes, thank you so much. It's Catherine. My apologies, I left you out.
That's okay.
Having said you were here, first of all, let me ask you if you approved the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then are you good to approve the meeting minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. I will try not to forget you when we come to the recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so one of the things that Dave Borak mentioned was that twice a year the chairs and the vice chairs from all the advisory boards around the country get together and we talk about things that are common to the sites. And one of the things that we do there is we also put recommendations together, and we kind of will have potential recommendations put together by anybody, and we get together in the meeting and we discuss it, and we rework them a lot of times and come up with recommendations. So at the meeting that we had last month, the chairs came up with 2 recommendations. They are presented to the individual boards. However, they are at this once they are presented to the boards, they are a straight up and down vote. So it means that we are, when we look at these, we're going to vote either yes or no on our approval of these recommendations. These were sent out in advance, so hopefully everyone got an opportunity to take a quick look at them. But we'll go ahead and talk about them. The first one concerns a recommendation on EM's cleanup performance roadmap and communication strategy. And I'll go ahead and Dennis, want to give us a very brief on that?
It was the opinion of from the meeting that we needed to have a very clear roadmap, as it states, so that each of the boards had a understanding about the communication policy, what was being communicated.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.